Hey y'all, Dr. Vickery here, and I am thrilled to be joined by the fabulous Donovan James, aka Queendom. So Donovan James is an early childhood elementary Black history educator. She graduated from Stevens College and taught elementary students for 7 years. She has given presentations and led workshops that promote the teaching of Black history in early childhood in elementary classrooms. Donovan is currently writing a book with Stenhouse Publishers titled Beyond February, which will center her experiences with Black histories in the elementary classrooms. Her publications include Motivating Writers Through Blogging from Stenhouse Publishers, A Recipe for Young Historians of Black History, Education Week, and Children Will Ask Questions About Race. How will teachers answer them from Teach for America, which we will read later in the semester, y'all. Donovan is currently pursuing her PhD at the University of Buffalo and is a fellow at the Center for K through 12 Black History and Racial Literacy Education. So Donovan, it is a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, cool. So I have a few questions that I'd like to start off our conversation. So first, can you tell me about your teaching background? So why did you want to become an elementary teacher? And then maybe also when and how did you really become interested in teaching social studies, Black histories?
Awesome. Yeah. So I have taught for 7 years, and I had the opportunity to teach in, I guess, two different spaces. So I taught in a private space. It was a multi-age K-5 classroom. So there are about 30 to 35 kids. You have three teachers. I was one of them. And students are grouped by ability, not so much like kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, or fifth. And so that was a really, really cool experience. And then I taught in kindergarten for 3 years. I've always loved school. I haven't had the best school experiences, but I've just always loved learning. And there have been a lot of teachers that have impacted me, whether good or bad. And so I wanted that. Like I wanted to be able to impact kids. And with teaching kindergarten, like if I could be like the first person that kind of got my hands on them and showed them just different ways of learning and exposing them to different things. That's really what I wanted to do. I've always loved history. I used to be really obsessed with like Greek mythology, geography. I love maps and globes. And so I also like took really cool like social studies courses when I could in high school. I just really love history and what it brings to the present day and how we can learn from it. And so that's how I got interested in social studies. Um, my interest in Black history came from home, where my parents, so we had portraits of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. And my dad was always reading these really cool books. And so there's a lot of Black pride in my home. And so that's how I really got interested in Black histories and noticing that I wasn't learning it at school, which was interesting. I mean, we learned about Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks, maybe a little bit of Harriet Tubman, but that's about it.
Yeah, I think that so many of us can resonate that. When we learn Black history, it's usually specific individuals and their place within specific time periods. So, going on that, looking at your Instagram page, it really shows how you've integrated, Black histories beyond February, which is, the title of your forthcoming book. And so could you talk about how did you go about integrating social studies throughout your day as a kindergarten teacher?
Yeah, so I have some slides to show you all, but before I do that, I noticed that we were required to teach social studies and science throughout our day, but it came at a really weird time in kindergarten where it was like we had like an hour and a half, and for 1 hour we were required to teach math, and then you have 30 minutes left. And so how can I teach a social studies or science lesson in 30 minutes that's going to be rich and dense and meaningful to kids? And so I looked for parts in our schedule where I could bring social studies in, maybe like things during morning meeting. I did a lot of celebrating, the months like Black History Month and Hispanic Heritage Month and bringing those aspects in. And then, of course, through literacy. And so I wanted to show you. to me. I think that's it. Right. So I started off in kindergarten in Missouri, where I taught. We had a foundations curriculum where students are learning their letters and sounds. And then one of the things that kids had to know were these sight words. And so they're technically memorizing them, and which is really hard thing to do. And kids shouldn't be sitting there like trying to memorize these words, but sight words are words that children memorize and recognize by sight. And so that's I, know, at, me, my, those kinds of words. And so one way to kind of bring social studies in is music was a big part of my classroom. We listened to music all the time. And so I would bring in spirituals or songs of protest or just different songs by different people. And I would bring those in and find sight words in those lyrics that my kids could go and find. And so Go Down Moses is a song about Harriet Tubman. So I would introduce it and say, this song has a code. And the kids were like, what? It was like, can we decipher the code? And so I know here you see like a lot of sight words for it, but I would just start with go. There's like stages to the song lyrics. So starting with the word go, I would tell them the title, what the song is about, and then we would practice singing the chorus of it. And then I would pull the lyrics up on the board and say, this is the word we're looking for, go. What sounds do you hear? What letters do you think are in that word? And then have them go and highlight it or circle it or color it in. And while they're doing this activity, the song is actually playing. And so I did this throughout the year. This was something that became routine, like they knew during our literacy stations that they would have a song for the week. And then they would take them home and share with family. So sometimes we built the word, sometimes we just wrote it, sometimes we just highlighted it. And then reading certain books, I would notice that there were songs mentioned in the book. So this one here is Let the Children March. And so it mentions a lot of different songs. And so I would just pull those song lyrics and kind of started that way. So it was a part of our literacy time, but it was also them doing sight words and also doing some history. So that's how it kind of started.
All right, that is fantastic. I love it. So, I mean, can you tell us some of your favorite, like, what were your favorite social studies lessons that you integrated with other subjects?
Yeah, so I have those two. Oh, these are just showing you that books are also a great way to bring in social studies during read aloud times. Okay, so I think I have three of my favorites. One is in kindergarten, we learn about rules and laws and why we should follow rules and the rules that kids have to follow at home and school. And so it's really hidden in these standards that kids need to learn how to follow rules, like rules, you just need to follow them. And so I kind of go in and challenge that idea. And we talk about like, what if you don't want to follow them? Like what happens? What can you do? And so I read the book Peaceful Fights for Equal Rights. And there's a lot of really cool civics books for kids. And we did some literacy, some writing about rights that people have or should have. And so you can see Werner wrote, we have the right to eat. Like that's something that everyone should have. And that also led us into another topic. There's a book out there about food pantries. And my mom heads a food pantry. And so we're able to interview and just talk about this right about eating food and how people should be able to have food whenever they want. And so we did literacy with that. And then we also we had a button maker in our media center. And so they did some pre-writing, writing down what is something that they want people to know or to believe in. And so they had to write about that. And then we were able to make buttons. So this is just a way to integrate social studies and literacy. And then in math, at first I was like, how am I going to bring social studies into math? But I found some really cool ways. So one of my favorite was when we talked about the history of the potato chip and George Crumb and how he created this idea of a potato chip. He was cooking potatoes, and the person that he was serving them to said they weren't hard and crispy enough, so he made them really, 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 really thin and thought the man wouldn't like them, but he did. And so we did a chip tasting. Sorry, it's the dog. We did a chip tasting, and so we tried like dill pickle and lime and honey barbecue, and we tasted them one at a time, and they got to talk about the taste of it, the feel of it, which one they liked, and then we did some graphing and brought in like which was our favorite, and we compared the data. So they were able to collect the data and graph it, and we did that as a whole group, which was really cool for them to see. So they got some social studies, but then they also, this is a part of their math, which collecting and graphing data is something that kindergartners need to learn how to do. And then in science, bringing social studies into science, I attended an Indigenous Peoples Day curriculum teaching through Teaching for Change. Hold on, buddy. Through Teaching for Change. And it was talking about this concept that in textbooks, we talk a lot about like conquering land or discovering land, and the land is already there. So changing how we talk about land and acknowledging it. And so we are learning about living and non-living things, living and non-living organisms. And in the curriculum, it just kind of seems like the most important things are the living things, like people and animals, and plants. But there's other parts of land that is also important, like rocks and things like that. So we talk about indigenous peoples. We talked about water. And so my kids did ask, like, well, is water living? Because it helps us to live. And so, like, they're inquiring about different things. And so the science department put out this video called Pocket Worlds. So finding a piece of nature around your school or around your neighborhood and kind of observing it and kind of looking at the things that were there. And so we took it a step further. It was a kind of it looked like a garden, but it really wasn't. It was a lot of plants outside of our classroom window. And so we watched the video about the pocket world, and then I talked to them about this land. I'm like, did we find this land here? And they're like, no. And they're like, it's already here. And I'm like, right. So we're just gonna take care of it. We're gonna love on it. And so we wrote our names and painted some rocks and really decorated the place and left a rock that says, this pocket world is loved by kindergarten royalty. That was our classroom name. And we went out all the time. Like, even there's a playground out there. And so they would even go out at recess time and check on this. We found like this really cool spider out there. And we would go and they're like, can we take a picture of it today? And then as it got cold, the spider was gone. And they're like, where's the spider? Like, where is it now? Like, it's not in its home. And so it was just a really cool way for them to acknowledge the land that our school is on, the land that is on their playground. And someone actually came, I had posted about it on Twitter. And so someone came to our classroom and wanted to interview them and talk to them and kind of hear about like what was going on. But just instilling in them, like, we did not find this land, we are not discovering it, like it was already here. And we even talked about like not killing the bugs, like this is their land, like nobody comes into our room and tries to smash us, so we shouldn't come out here and try to smash the bugs. So it just really helped them to really acknowledge where they are and to take care of the nature around them. And any other place, if we were going on a walk, I mean, they were just really careful about the things that they did because we did this lesson. And so this is bringing social studies into science. And I think that was, yeah, so those are some of my favorites.
Oh, that is fantastic. I love that you were very intentional about fostering this like inherent curiosity that young children have. And I feel like oftentimes because of the focus of standardized testing, we don't have time for that. We just have to teach the curriculum and whatnot. But you're really designing these lessons to have students ask questions, but also their like this organic curiosity is also guiding your lessons and how they're taking what they're learning and they're going out and applying it and having you rethink, how we traditionally think about land and can you really own land? And it's our land. We need to nurture it. We need to take care of it. I also love that you are bringing in primary sources, when you are integrating social studies. So, and you've done a beautiful job of integrating social studies with these other subject areas where the social studies-ness hasn't been watered down. You're
Right.
bringing in primary sources with kindergartners. So having them analyze songs are artifacts from the time period. Um, and I love that also you're bringing in and utilizing community resources. So, you talked about the food pantry. I think the book you're talking about, was it the Saturday at the Food Pantry
Yes,
that
yes.
you read?
Actually had it's right down the street, but we contacted, they're like, can we send them an email? And so he actually brought a barrel to our classroom. And so they went home. I mean, they were bringing so I said, please be sure, I'm going to send a letter to your families, because they were talking about all things they're going to bring. And I was like, wait a minute, I don't need kids like hauling food. And their parents like, why are you taking the food? But I sent in letters, and I remember that week we did that. Like, parents were actually coming in the building, like, hey, we brought this stuff, the kids, and putting it in there. So yeah.
I love that, and having your mom come and speak to the kids about the food pantry, and you're tackling topics that are considered kind of taboo. We don't really talk about these things, having kids rethink, that the food pantry is a resource in our community, and sometimes people need to use this, to utilize this. And so this kind of, lends, carries over to my next question. So you unapologetically and just beautifully teach, Black histories, but also you teach in a way that is affirming and loving to all students and teaches them to be, critical citizens. And to, I've seen on Instagram that you use Carol Boston Weatherford's book about the, Tulsa massacre. So these are topics that some people will say are inappropriate for young children, but you bring them to your kindergartners. So why is it important for you to teach in this way?
Yeah, I noticed that we really do underestimate kids in what they can kind of handle or understand. And they can understand and, I guess, handle a lot more than we think. But I also don't want my kids to feel like, this is, I'm just trying to scare them or hurt them or in any way. And especially when there are picture books out there written by people that are doing it in a way that kids can understand, like telling them this truth, like that this did happen. And it kind of allows them to be activists. I mean, they really kind of take this information in, and then they're questioning, like, well, why did they do that? Do they still do that? I wouldn't do that. Just really trying to figure out, like, where does this stand in history, and then kind of what is my role. And I see that could just play out in our classroom, like them just standing up for things like, hey, that wasn't okay for you to do that, or Miss James said we're not allowed to do that. Even if I'm just not in the space, they're like, hey, we're not supposed to do that, or that wasn't okay. And even bringing things that may have happened on the playground, like someone said this to us, so we did this. And, sometimes you have to be like, okay, you can't do that. But, they just really feel like they can make a difference and that their voice matters. And that's something that I want to just kind of show them, like, yes, these things happen, but people were standing up for these things and against these things and resisted. And just allowing them to see that, even though they're young. And again, like I said, we just really underestimate them, but it's just important for them to see, like, who they are and their role in society. Um, and that, the world is not like the world they may just see at home. Like, it's what they may see in the classroom, and even broader than that. So seeing other people and seeing other cultures, I think it's just really important for littles to kind of go on. And if I can kind of get them at that point, and then hopefully they can carry that on, into the next grades, and knowing, like, when they learn something, like, hey, but we also learned about this, or, I also know this, or I can do that.
Yes, yes, yes. I love that. And so my last question is, do you have any, or I guess I'll ask, this way, did you have support? Did you feel like you had support from parents and administrators? I know that you mentioned that you involved the parents a lot by sending letters home and letting them know we're doing this and so on and so forth. Because, facing backlash is a huge concern for a lot of our pre-service teachers, backlash from parents, administrators, trolls, you name it. And so do you have any advice for our pre-service teachers about, you know, teaching in a way that's affirming and preparing them to be, you know, critical, loving citizens, but at the same time, you know, staying employed and, you know, making sure that they're safe?
Yeah. I was very transparent about what I was teaching. Like I was putting things out into the hallway. As I mentioned earlier, like every week, my favorite thing was to just gather all the photos I had took in our classroom through that week and just like sending it out to families. And so I've had just so much family support and also community support. I think it's important that we too, like schools are part of the community that we live in. So also accessing that and letting the kids in both the community know, like, we're here and we want to help. We did a study on bees and just talk about the importance of bees, and they wanted to go on a march. Like they were ready. And I was like, okay, we're gonna go on a march. And they made posters. And so we went out to the neighborhood and this guy was like cutting his grass. And they're like, stop cutting your grass. You're killing the bees. And he did. He sat, he like was on his riding lawnmower, he stopped and he waved, and it was just really cool. But they know like they're a part of that community and even their school community. Our assistant principal said he saw a bee in the school, was gonna kill it. He said, but I remember you guys were out there protesting, so like I did it. And so just allowing them to see like, oh my God, like what we did, like it matters. And so I did have a lot of support from my administrators and parents, but I think it's because I knew that I could defend what I was doing. Like I wasn't just bringing in random things to just teach to teach. Like I could connect these to the standards. Like if someone were to come into my room and say, "Hey, that's not the resource that we said was for this lesson," I can say, "Well, I know that may be true, but go ask my kids what it is that they're doing, or go see what they're doing. It is definitely connected." So that would be my biggest piece of advice for you. Like it may take a little more time in your planning, but to look at your standards and say, okay, if this is what we need to do, I know some really cool resources or some really cool people, or some really awesome books that would support and supplement this standard. And then, like I said, if someone were to come in and challenge you on it, like, look, it's all right here. It all makes sense. I'm not just out here, causing ruckus. Like I'm teaching kids in just a different way and using different resources.
I love that. I love the idea of you reiterating that schools are a part of the community. So, you know, being transparent about this is what we're doing, involving the community in it, but then also, like you said, using the standards to support how you're teaching. The standards sometimes they seem like they're so restrictive, but I feel like they're guidelines. You can find spaces to teach in this way. So use them, you know, to justify how you're teaching.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right. Well, any other tidbits, advice, or knowledge that you have from pre-service teachers? I know I also, you know, you mentioned, you know, I was also thinking about like what other, like, do you have like online like organizations or communities that you follow on social media or that you're a part of? I know you mentioned Teaching for Change.
Yeah.
Any other advice or
Um,
resources you can just shout out, highlight?
I would say, and that I don't know if people like not I don't know underestimate, but like children's books are really awesome. Like there is so much in them. Like I have used like I educate myself first, of course, but I have been able to like look at a picture book, look at the end pages, the author's note, the glossary, or whatever other information they leave in the children's book, and been able to teach with that. So there are so many like good resources within books. Any books by Carol Boston Weatherford. She just really does a wonderful job of taking these what people would consider a hard history, something, and putting it in a book and making it something that children can kind of digest or understand and relate to. Um, Also, of course, Learning for Justice has some really cool resources. Zen Ed has a lot of really cool resources. And really, yeah, picture books. I follow the authors. Also just following like the publishers, like HarperCollins had some really awesome books that are coming out, and just seeing like what's out there. and how it can connect to your social studies. So, books are a great way to teach social studies. I mean, it'll lead up to discussion, and you can say that we're just doing a read aloud. The kids just happen to be talking about it. So books are a really, really, really good way.
I love it. I love it. All right. Well, Miss James, thank you, thank you, thank you for your time, your expertise, for talking to our pre-service teachers and just giving them so much wisdom about how social studies can be meaningfully integrated throughout the, throughout the day, the kindergarten day. So thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you.